Welcome to episode 15, and in this one we're going to be taking a look at even more CSS selectors. And like I have stated in the previous episodes, there are a ton of them, and in this one I'm really going to show you even more of them that are very important for any designer to know, and really how we're going to take advantage of them. So let's just jump right into this here. The first one is called the universal selector. Some people call it the global selector. Basically all it does is select every single element on your page. So just like any other selector, we'll put in the universal selector, which is just an asterisk, and then we'll open our curly brackets, and then any styles that we put in here are going to be applied to every single element on the page. You might be thinking that there's not many uses for it, and you're sort of right on that regard because, most of the things we can put in here really aren't relevant for every single element we'll ever have. For example, not every element will have the same margins, the same size, the same color text. Most of the time everything is going to be a little bit different. However, there are a few examples where this can truly help you. So let me show you one thing. Most of the time you put your font family on the body class. So let's just say I made the entire body Helvetica. This works for a few different things here. So we can see our paragraphs, our Helvetica, our links, and our bullet points here. However, any user interface elements, like I have this text box here, or any buttons or any inputs, they will keep the system default font, which in this case is Lucida Grande because I'm on a Mac. However, if we wanted the font family to be applied to even these UI elements, we can put it on the universal selector, and then you can see that now even this text box has the Helvetica font. So it's definitely very handy. The next selectors that we're going to be talking about in this video are kind of different than any other selectors that we've already used. And this is because they're called pseudo-selectors. The prefix pseudo means sort of, and the reason why these are sort of selectors are because they don't stand well on their own. So we can't just type this selector. We actually have to put something before it in order for it to work. So the first couple of pseudo-selectors are pseudo-element selectors. Don't worry about memorizing this terminology, just try to focus on what you can use to accomplish a certain task. So for the first pseudo-element selector, I'm going to show you how to use a drop cap, and basically that's just having the first letter of your paragraph bigger than the rest of the text. It's commonly used in novels and many other book formats. So to do that, we first type the element that we want this to be applied to. So I'll type the P. Now we type a colon and then any other pseudo selectors after that. So I'll type in first dash letter. There we have it. We've just created a pseudo selector by linking it to a regular selector. Now we can type pretty much any styles we would ever want to in here. So if just say I made this font size 60 pixels, now the first letter of that paragraph is larger than the rest of the text. Definitely a very handy thing to use. The next one is first line. If we put this one on our paragraph, the entire first line of text, even if we resize the page, is that same font size. This can only be used on block level elements, so you can't use this on buttons or spans or anything like that. However, since it's a paragraph, it works completely fine. Another handy pseudo element selector is the first child selector. This is a little bit trickier than the first two we've discussed, but it is still very handy. So for example, we already know that we can put certain HTML elements inside of another HTML element. So in this example, we have 3 list items inside of one unordered list. And these 3 list items are children, of this one list. So let's just say we wanted the very first list item to be green. Well, what we could do is just put a class on here and just call it first. then in style.css we could say dot first color green. However, this is just unsemantic markup because we don't need that there at all. There's already a selector that will select the very first element. So to do that, all we have to do is first type li and then type in first dash child. So this is just saying select all list items, but only when they are the first child of their parent. So then we can go ahead and apply a color of green, and if we preview this, it works fine. This works very well the opposite way as well. We can type last child, and now it's applied to this third one here. This is pretty cool because now if we have another element that has to go in here, let's call it fourth. Now that one has this green style instead of third. So again, definitely very handy. The next set of pseudo-selectors I want to talk about is the link pseudo-selectors. The links don't have much to them. The only real one that is not really the same as anything else and is really quite unique is the visited pseudo-selector. So the visited can only be used on A elements because it is a link pseudo-selector. So we can type A, colon, and then visited. What visited basically does is it checks your browser history to see if you've accessed a certain website before. If you have, that will receive this style. If you have not, then it won't, and it will fall back to whatever an A usually has. So we can set this to something like color green again. And you can see that these are blue. Now once I click on them, they turn green. Even if we refresh, they still remain green because they know that we've been there before. The last set of pseudo-selectors I want to talk about are dynamic pseudo-selectors. And dynamic pseudo-selectors pretty much only apply the class under certain conditions. Only when the user completes an action, really. So there are 3 of these: hover, active, and focus. And they all do pretty unique things. So let's just say every time the user hovers over an A, we want it to turn yellow. So to do that, we can just type A, a colon, and hover, and then, color yellow. Now if we hover over any of these A's, you see they turn yellow. Active pretty much only applies when the user is clicking on something. So if we type A active here, we could say maybe color, I don't know, fuchsia. There we go. Now you can see when we click on something, it turns this pink color. Again, definitely very handy. Now do know that these can be applied to pretty much anything. I just have them set to apply on the A tag here, but we can put these right on the paragraph tag, right on these list elements, right on the text box if we wanted to. It doesn't really matter as long as it's an element. The last one I mentioned was focus, and focus really only applies to forms. Usually if you are selecting a form and you are changing the input, you get this blue glow around the form element like I have on this text box here. So there are other styles that you can apply to these elements when it has that blue glow around it. Now I'm not going to show you that much about this today just because we haven't really gone into forms yet. The reason being because even if you can create a form in HTML, you can't do anything unless you know PHP. However, I'll show you this on the text area element, which I have right here, because text area is still kind of helpful because it lets the user select things easier. So if maybe you wanted to give away a block of code, you can easily let the user double click in it, copy it, and then paste it whenever he or she needs it. So if we just go ahead and take text area and put on the focus dynamic pseudo selector, we can do whatever we want with it. So let's say color gray. Now if the user goes to edit that text, you can see it does turn gray. So again, you can use this in whatever way you want. So maybe you wanted the readability to increase whenever someone clicked it. So if I set the font size to 18 pixels, now every single time the user clicks it, the font gets larger and makes it a little bit easier to edit. If they click outside of it, it goes back to the default styling. So these are just a few different selectors here that I think will be very, very useful in any of your next projects. And in the next episode, we'll talk a little bit about CSS resets.